Hey guys, want to do a different type of podcast today. What I want to do is dive in with Mandy's joining us on the podcast to do a bit more of a deep dive into what we've learned over the year. I think Mandy and I chat so many times throughout the week around what we're seeing with our clients, what we'd like to do in the future, and all the many things in between of just, we always have ideas, and I think only one out of 100 ever get to the surface. But being able to see the amount of data that we have access to, we have a ton of thoughts, and I really love to see that we have quite a strong following now where they listen to every single podcast. You guys listen to everything that we put up. But I know that a lot of this is very educational and we're focused on the key topics, I guess, that come to the surface at the time. But I think there's a lot of stuff in between those topics that I think really makes a difference. And, Mandy even put a post up this morning around not just the things that need to be done, but why we're not doing them, right? And I find myself just continually more looking to understand what that gap is, because we can optimize every aspect of nutrition, but if you don't do it, it didn't help. And the biggest gap, I think, between people that don't know how to eat healthy or don't know what it takes to get their body back in shape and knowing what to do and not doing it, right, is a fascinating gap of just what we sort of dive into. So, Mandy, where I want to start is, look, we're going to do so much, I think, in this type of chat, but an awareness of where I'd love to start is kind of observations of 2024, right? We're looking back at a few hundred clients that we've worked with, 400 or 500 clients at least in a one-on-one setting, as well as thousands alongside our gut reset, etc. I'd love to know what you're seeing. We bring up so many topics. What are some of the key ones that you'd want to highlight as being like your pinnacle, your key ones that people need to know?
Mm. Well, I think you raise an interesting point, right? The post that I did this morning about those behavioral changes, and it's been an interesting year for me personally as a nutritionist, because obviously I love to get into the science and nerd out and learn the mechanistic reasons why change occurs, but none of it matters if the person can't actually put that into practice. And so for me this year, a lot of my reading and a lot of my personal development and a lot of my learning and thought process has actually been in the behavioral space more than anything else. And so when you said, think of your three top takeaways, my mind went to the science, but my brain was fully embedded into the application piece. And those were the things that kind of came to the surface. So I think probably one of the bigger ones for me this year is actually on how do you we know from the research that whatever matters, that when it comes to diet lifestyle, what matters the most is the thing you can sustain. It's not the thing you actually do, but it's how long you can do it for. And so what actually helps a person to take this useful thing that they might be doing and actually be able to do it on repeat again and again and again, even when it gets boring, even when we get busy and whatnot.
Yeah,
So
even when we were doing some initial panels like the blood work side of things, right? We used to have these big, expansive, long reports of all the stuff that you needed to know. Yet, if they don't do anything, none of that reporting was any use at all, right?
yeah,
So, this idea of perceived value because there's lots of documents, but you don't do anything because there's the paralysis by analysis,
yeah,
is
yeah.
not as helpful as here are two steps I'd like you to do. And they could be as simple as I need you to hit 2.5 liters of water and I need you to move and I need you to hit 6,000 steps, right? And I think realizing that if someone actually does that for an extended period of time, that was so much more valuable than a 4-page report. And we're seeing that come through in a couple of places.
Heck yeah, yeah. The science is complex, the application is simple, and it's simple, not easy though. So actually being able to look at it from the perspective of how does someone actually embed that into their life is the key thing. But to bring that back to your question of what's kind of come to the surface, I guess one of the ones for me is it's a concept from the Gap and the Gain book, which we actually heard about from Mick, who is one of our clients. And I read it and it was a massive perspective shift for me on looking at it. Changed how I think about my own personal growth and progress, but it changed how I talk to clients, changed how I coach. But it's this concept of looking at it's like a continuum, right? There's your starting point, there's where you are currently, and then there's where you want to be. And your starting point and where you are currently, that's the gain. So that's what you've gained. That's the progress you've actually truly made. And then where you are currently to where you want to be is the gap. And typically we will measure progress by how close we are to where we want to be. But it's an ever moving target because it's a horizon. So you never actually get any closer to it, which means that you can quickly run out of steam because one small step doesn't actually move you closer to that end goal. But one small step took you further from where you started, which is the true progress you've actually made. And so looking at everything we do through this lens of if I make this choice today to do this workout when I don't feel like it, or if I make this choice today to do some meal prep and eat a boring lunch when everyone else is eating something from the cafe or whatever, it's in the context of the end goal, it makes no difference. But in the context of what you gain from it, it makes all the difference. And it's like, it's so subtle, but it's so powerful to get you to just to do that thing one more time, one more time, one more time.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
such a good example, I think, of personal confidence, right? I keep coming back to this idea of those 1% wins. And
Mm.
for someone, it might be walking past the lollies in the supermarket without picking up a full bag of them, right? That could be a huge win for the week, right? And
Yeah.
gaining that, even if I didn't lose 10 kilos in like 30 seconds, then it was still a win because it was still an awareness of the actions that need to be done on a regular basis in order to feel like you're in control. And I think too many people feel that they just fall into these situations with the lollies or the beer or the whatever the thing might be. And I think those are really the confidence gaps that are built, right? When you have enough of those in your backpack, then you have the confidence to take the next step or really back yourself.
Yeah.
So that's the stuff that, in a coaching scenario, as you said, is less clinical but more behavioral, and it just
Mm.
reinforces everything that then you're then prescribing because you're backing it based on small actions will lead to bigger outcomes than here's a massive list of stuff you aren't confident doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I had this conversation with a client actually a week or so back now, and she has to drive an hour or so after work on a couple of days a week, and it's her crux because she always stops at this particular petrol station and always buys sweet stuff. And this one time she didn't, and she told me about it, and we had this little celebration about the fact. And it's one thing, like actually in the grand scheme of life, probably doesn't matter that much, but for her it meant everything because it proved to her that she could do it, and it was what it gave her the confidence to be able to do it again and again. Like you say, it builds confidence because you've actually done the thing.
Yeah, yeah. So the first one there is measuring backwards. That kind of
Mm.
concept of rather than just constantly looking ahead at where you're going, have a look at where you've come from, and
Mm.
just using that as fuel to build next steps.
Mm. Yeah, you use your goal as your direction and your
Yeah.
starting point as what you track progress against.
Yeah, very nice. Well, we might have to dive into book recommendations because that one's clearly been a pivotal one for you this year.
It really has actually, yeah. Yeah.
Nice. For me, I think to like kind of build on the back of that, my one that really came through this year was benchmarks and knowing some sort of target that really motivates you. And I think I've noticed this in myself simply with a quite small little challenge that a local gym did that was like had it alongside the Olympics, and there were four exercises that we could compete in right in our little gym. And I noticed a measurable increase in momentum of training because I had a focus.
Mm.
And I had done this with clients for years with certain events and certain targets, but actually seeing that externally being placed on me as opposed to, okay, let's work on the deadlift now. I saw how much it improved my focus and enjoyment as well of training for that period of time. So, for me, I'm always playing between this balance of having a goal to feel like you can be motivated for, plus also just going every day because it's in your calendar. And I really haven't landed on an answer here, but I do think it's both. And I think it's kind of
Mm.
all the biggest questions of life are kind of a dichotomy to be managed as opposed to like a one answer. But this is one of them where, I see people who, book a half marathon or an Ironman, and that's the only thing that gets them motivated. And I think that is a risk because it means that without this massive event, you don't have a focus. And that really, I've seen that to be less helpful to consistency than helpful. But
Mm.
to be in a spot where you're constantly showing up every day, you're getting the workouts in, amazing. You're already in the 1%. But if you don't have a focus, there's probably a lack of momentum or intensity to those workouts because there's nothing you're driving towards.
Mm.
So, certainly if you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s plus, I think it's really important to keep yourself honest because even if you're going regularly, you might just notice that you're going through the motions, going backwards, or never really changing up your program enough to challenge you. So if you are doing something regularly, have a benchmark to really set that standard that you know that you're not going backwards because anything past, say, 32, 34, you're technically past your peak performance from a biological aspect. So if you're training regularly, there will be a regression in performance unless focused on.
Yeah.
And I think being able to look at that as what's important to you, right? It might be a 1K run. It might be a deadlift. It might be keeping and protecting 30-second dead hang or a pull up, or you can choose whatever you like. For us, we really like a balance between strength and fitness. So it might be something like a rowing machine and a deadlift. So you're getting a nice balance of power as well as fitness. So take those if you want to take those. But that awareness of benchmarks, because that once a year ski trip or that once a year hike that continues to get harder and harder every year is not fun if you don't have some control over it. And I
Yeah.
think being able to have those benchmarks and realize that you're gaining momentum into summer and you're like, I'm actually going to crush it this year because I feel strong. That's
Mm.
something we've seen with a lot of clients. And I think it just has a huge impact, again, from a behavioral aspect, but it very much ties into day to day focus as well.
It's so true, right? That it's the answer is in the middle. You have to have that connection to values and that standard that you set for yourself, which means you just go and show up whether you feel like it, want to or not. But you can make it so much more fun and enjoyable by inserting those things to actually like those little targets to aim for along the way. I've done that actually a lot this year as well. Just kind of strength things that I've wanted to hit or targets or whatever. And they do motivate so much. You can't rely on that for the long term because you have to have a greater reason. But I think certainly adds an element of fun to it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think as I wrote in a post the other day, having a goal of training, not just generally everything. I want to be stronger, fitter, leaner, whatever the thing might be.
Mm,
No, I'm in a 6-week phase of getting lean, or I'm in a
mm,
6-week phase of getting strong, right? And I think separating those just has in itself a huge amount of utility because you need to strip back the amount of things you could do to the three things that really move you forward.
mm.
That might be, three key lifts, etc. So yeah, I think those key phases really gets you out of the funk of just kind of going through and doing stuff, but really changing up training enough to get yourself out of that comfort zone, right? Because we all know that's a space we will fall back into. It's a You had a lovely phase on this the other or phrase on this, Mandy, that I've recently forgotten, but that space of what was it? Sort of active recovery versus passive disengagement.
Oh yeah, I've got this in a topic call today. And I've totally forgotten it.
Well, the concept
um,
while you're getting an
yeah,
idea of what it is, that
yeah,
I've remembered it. Yeah, it was active recovery or passive disengagement, and what that
yes.
meant, from my view, or what I took away from it, was this idea of like recovery in a sense that isn't just blobbing on the couch. Actually
Mm,
requires some level of intention, right?
mm,
Doing some form of stretching to finish off your night routine, going for a walk at 2 o'clock after a meal. These are things that you will feel so much better for doing, but they
mm,
require just that extra little nudge to get out the door, right? The heaviest weight in
mm,
the gym is the front door. And being able to look at that space of just self care being something that isn't about doing less, but rather intentionally doing things for you and choosing that time and time again actually takes, not a huge amount of effort, but certainly a
mm,
huge amount of intention versus passive disengagement, which is I am tired, TV goes on and blob, right? And then
mm.
you feel no better getting up. You usually, most of the time, feel worse because you've now dug into sleep time or you haven't connected with the people that were sitting right next to you. All of these things that just, if there's not that little bit of intent, you can just
Mm,
watch life go by pretty quick.
mm. I might go down a rabbit hole here, but this is I think about this a lot in terms of people that just no, I know that there's so much nuance, there's so much depth here, but in terms of people that really struggle with energy, right? More often than not, a lack of energy is a lack of doing stuff. Get out and do some stuff. Energy begets energy. You expend some energy, you get some energy, you feel better for it. The snowball it grows and you feel better and better as you go along. The danger is that it goes the other way really fast. If you stop doing the stuff, you feel worse, so you do less, so you feel worse, so you do less, so you feel worse. But it does actually require that thing of doing the uncomfortable thing first in a way of it's like within the sense of recovery, like you said there, sometimes it's doing the thing that you don't necessarily want to do in that moment, but you feel so much better for it. And with the energy thing, it's you might not have the energy, but go for a walk because it's going to give you the energy to feel better next time and it builds.
Yeah, I think it's a simple realization, and you said it a different way the other day, but this whole idea of sustainability, if you're only sustaining your current level, you're sustaining where you currently are, right? So
Mm,
if you want to change, there is going to be a level of discomfort required in order to have a new reality. And I think if that is just getting that first walk out the way and building a morning routine of like, oh, actually, I felt good for going for that walk. I might do it again tomorrow. But that
mm,
first one is, well, it's cold outside and I'd rather feel better in the sheets and I've only got 15 minutes, so I might miss it, right? And all of those stories that just get through the first one.
mm.
One of the challenges we're doing with our clients at the moment, which might entirely put you off, but it's this concept as well, which is the cold showers, right? And it's one of these things that, yes, it has all these physical benefits, but like you can't go past the mental benefit of just doing a hard thing that you didn't want to do, right? And you build
Mm.
that into your day and just the momentum you gain from something like that.
Yeah.
I don't think you need to do it every day, but I do think that being able to just push through boundaries and comfort levels that you have is a huge skill in itself. And without going
Mm.
full David Goggins on you, I think that space of just being able to change the routine in order to get a different result is always a nice message to get through.
Yeah. Yeah. Our environments are wired for comfort, right? And comfort is not wired for health in a lot of ways, because all the things that provide us comfort actually, in the long term, probably take away from what will be our health. But it's comfortable to not move. It's comfortable to order your own food and never have to prepare it, or all of those things. Ultimately, there's a
Yeah,
problem.
there was Mandy. This I'd love to know what movie I was watching, but it was probably 10 years ago now, 15 years ago, and it
Mhm.
was this. It was kind of like cartoony, but it was or animated, and it
Of
was
course.
this kind of future paced into like 2040, 2050 type space. And it was just
Mhm.
this like classic visual of like everyone basically in little like moped things with everything
Ah.
they ever need in the moped, right? Like it was like they've got their digital screen, they've got food on the go, they're all massively overweight, and they just all get zipped around. And like I've never got that visual out of my head because it's like just where we're progressing to, where
I
everything's so
know.
instant and so easy that we'd never have to be challenged. And
Yeah.
I'd love to know what the movie was, but it's just stuck in my head ever since that movie. So yeah, I do think that we have to actively work against that. And actually, like I am always big on is I'm not impressed by you going to the gym because it's hard and you didn't like
Mm.
it and you're suffering and like look at me.
Mm.
I am more impressed by finding comfort in the discomfort, right? Like really
Mm.
leaning into challenge, seeing that you have more, looking and challenging for more, and really pushing towards that. And then when you can
Mm.
enjoy that and you do it regularly and you don't do it for any external validation, but you feel great doing it and you show up better, well, that I'm impressed by because it's something I
Mm.
know you continue, right? And I think it's this whole space that we're trying to break up of, you do the transformation, amazing, but keep it off, right? And what does this
Mm.
look like in 12 months, 24 months when you've put double the weight back on? That's a real problem. And I think we're seeing a lot of really short-term diets that are leading to long-term sort of being worse off, as opposed
Mm.
to talking about the behavioral stuff that really keeps you there. And I think this is
Mm.
why, again, no intention of going this way, but we have now of
Yeah,
of just
we're
talking
done.
about the actual, if you're listening to this on the podcast, think about how you approach exercise, and are you pushing yourself and beating yourself up and saying you have to do it, or is it something that you know you'll be better because you did, right? And you won't
Mm.
enjoy every minute. We certainly don't. There's going to be some moments like, oh, this is really tough, or it's really cold, or I really don't want to get in the cold bath. But being able to do hard things and feel better because of it, I know I feel sharper and better because.
Yeah. We talked about this actually on squad calls the other week, about that fulfillment or that joy in the process of it. And I think there's so much room for that to occur when it comes to movement and training, because there's so much instant feel good that you get out of it. Like, not necessarily right in the moment, in the 10 seconds or 30 seconds that you're sprinting up a hill, that's going to feel a bit rubbish. But immediately afterwards, you're going to feel pretty good. And then after the fact, you're going to feel so awesome. The fact that you did it, you're going to feel stronger. You're going to, walk with your chest up a little bit, because you actually just feel good. Like, you get that feel good, like that
Yep.
feedback loop's pretty quick.
Yep.
So I think it's where I think with movement, which kind of ties into another thought that I guess I've had a lot of this year, is just in the movement piece. But do the thing and find which part of it you like. Because if you're forcing yourself to do it and hating every minute of it, you're never going to continue it. And you're probably going to get less of a benefit out of the hard thing that you've already done than if you did it and enjoyed the thing in the first place. So find the thing that you like about it. There's got to be something there and it's going to, it's seeking out that, like that benchmark you said, seek out the thing that kind of motivates you to do the thing again. And it might be thinking about things you used to enjoy when you were younger, or might be entirely different, who knows? But I think finding the part of what we say we believe, right? So if we say we hate it, we say we don't want to do it, we say we're not going to enjoy it, then that's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. But if you actually try and look for the part of it that you like and part of it that you enjoy, that's the fun part.
Yeah, I want to double click on this for a second because I've kind of been going back and forth a wee bit with the idea of doing things you enjoy. I think again, there's levels to it, right? Because if
Mm.
all you're doing right now is the circuit classes that are entertaining and you're, watching someone in front of you exercise and you exercise as well,
Yeah.
I've found that to be a real problem with exercise lately, certainly if you're in your 40s, 50s, etc.,
Mm.
where you are being entertained and you are, yes, moving. But if
Mm.
it's all in this sort of unhelpful, higher heart rate stuff that's very much your body's maybe not adapted to the same way or not recovering from, that can
Mm.
be less helpful. I think, and I'm assuming this is what you mean, but from my side, finding what you enjoy, it's less about finding it, but finding a way to enjoy,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because if you have to do emails every day, as a silly example, you could do emails and say, oh, I hate doing emails like every day and like just suffer
Mm.
through it. Or you could say, I'm actually really enjoying this. I've got a new system I'm working with. I'm
Yeah.
improving, whatever the thing might be, right?
Mm.
But that space of actually enjoying the thing you know you need to do regularly
Yeah.
allows you to have a reframe to enjoy the damn thing, right? Because
Yeah.
if you're doing something just to enjoy it, well, amazing, keep doing it. But if it's detrimental to the overall goal, which we've seen, is
Mm.
we might be doing a ton of circuit classes, but no actual resistance training or the
Mm.
other types of training. I think that's kind of a fine line that maybe I'm getting too technical, but the ability to look at, find ways to enjoy, not just find things you enjoy.
Yeah, yeah. It's the whole concept, I guess, of short-term enjoyment versus long-term enjoyment. If what you're doing now is just, say a circuit class because that's what you enjoy right now, that could be shortchanging your long-term enjoyment of movement and whatnot because you're losing muscle mass or whatever it is that's happening. So it's that balance, isn't it? Of you need to do what's going to build the long-term enjoyment of being able to do the things you want to do. If your goal is to be able to get out with your kids and do stuff and go for a mountain bike or go skiing or whatever, you're going to need to find some joy in the process of the things that allow you to maintain that, which is probably going to be some strength training and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yep. Cool. Well, as you can see, guys, we only had to write like two things on a piece of paper and we could go for an hour, but we're only halfway through our list. The first one that we wanted to highlight was the measuring backwards, get an awareness of how far you've really come to, I guess, pat yourself on the back a little bit, build some confidence and use that momentum to keep going. That's the big one that Mandy mentioned first. My second one on top of that was build those benchmarks, have some targets in place that you know you're getting stronger and not just regressing into comforts of what you're always doing. All right. We're going to go one more each, and hopefully it doesn't take another 30 minutes. But the ability to look at my next one will be stronger on tracking, right? One of the things that I'm really big on, and I will always be, is self awareness and the ability to know what your body is telling you. But the thing that I overlooked, and it might sound silly to say out loud, but I have a certain awareness of how I feel on foods because I have a huge awareness of what I've eaten. And the only way to build that awareness is through some form of measuring or intentional focus for an extended period of time, right? If you don't know what's causing you to feel bloated, then you're going to be guessing. You feel off and you feel that things are not responding or functioning like they should, but you're not feeling good and you don't know what it's coming from. So, one of the things that I think we've addressed a lot more inside the program, and we're definitely seeing it lead to better results through a larger percentage of clients, is we still have a very simple way of looking at this, right? You don't need to go in with fully granular tracking to find exactly how much iron and potassium your berry has, but being able to look at a level of awareness around what did I eat? How did I feel off that meal? What is my goal? And is this in line with that goal? And having variations of tracking at different stages in that journey. So, to give you insight, we would initially start with some form of photos. So, we just have insight as a coach. What are you eating? When are you eating it? And where are those problem areas really coming through? Versions of that we've really started to look into a lot more are things like glucose monitors and looking at, well, you're eating at this time of day. That's looking really good, but you're also stressed out for 3 hours afterwards. What's going on there, right? And actually adding metrics or tangible numbers to stress and to how you operate your day has been really big in itself. And then, of course, going through some form of, at minimum, and Mandy's huge on this, and I am too, of tracking protein targets, right? Like
Mm.
if I think I'm eating a decent amount of protein and I surround myself with the general population, a big amount of protein might be 50 grams a day, right? Like it's
Mhm.
so small and so under what we would recommend for, vibrant, healthy, functioning 50, 60, 70-year-olds that we really need to reset the bar because the amount of times we've set this benchmark and they basically say, I have to eat how much? And so many times people are eating more than they were before, or obviously a larger percentage of protein. Now, we don't take it to the massive extremes where you're rolling out the door, or you need to go to your, Argentine buffet every day to hit your protein target. But it does need to be an awareness of actual tracking, what that translates to throughout meals in your day, so you actually now have a measure of it, right? I know
Mm.
what roughly 200 grams of chicken on a plate looks like because I measured it for 10 years, right? And
Mm.
I no longer need to measure it. I still do it quite regularly because I find it fairly simple to do. But by having that benchmark, obviously have a lot more confidence in my general baseline of food intake.
Mm. Yeah, what gets measured gets managed, right? And I think measuring and tracking food in particular is because there's so many things we can track and measure, right? Like movement or glucose or all sorts of different things. Sleep, yeah, exactly. But food, I think it's so educational. There's such a in some circles, I think there's a little bit of a pushback against some forms of food tracking because they suggest maybe that can lead to like eating disorders and those sorts of things. But from my perspective and all the clients that I've worked with, it's only ever been helpful because it's so educational because we don't understand our food that well. We think we eat more protein than we do. We generally eat more carbs than we think we do. And fat just is in there doing its thing, sometimes really high for some, sometimes really low for others. And I think the value sometimes is not about even understanding how you're overeating. A lot of the time, it's understanding how you're undereating too, undereating protein, undereating total fuel and stuff, whatnot, to actually fuel a busy human. So yeah, there's so much value from an educational piece and actually putting some effort into learning what's in your food, how does it measure up, how do you spread it across your day. It's yeah, it's a great tool.
And it kind of ties into your other one, which was the overall movement for the day as well, right? Which was
Mm.
for me, and this comes from more of a personal training and standard fitness background, where if I didn't exercise that day, I drastically reduced my intake, right? Where the if I exercise that day, I eat away more. And being able to realize that just general movement throughout my day, right? Doing some gardening or going for a
Mhm.
long walk or just being out of the ordinary routine where I'm not sedentary the entire day, I'm still
Mm.
burning a considerable amount of calories and I'm not going to instantly put on a whole lot of body fat because I had some carbs.
Mm.
And I
Mm.
think sometimes that's where the concern comes from. And the initial worry around people tracking is
Mm.
because they don't want to be overly obsessive with, oh, how many carbs did I have? But when you start to put tangible numbers to how much movement you're actually doing in your day, I've actually found the opposite. I found I'm more relaxed
Yeah.
with days that I'm not exercising because I realize that it's a total accumulation of really the week as opposed to just a day. And I
Yeah.
think that in itself we could probably spend a whole hour on. But the ability to look at you, even if you lost the day, you didn't lose the week, right? That has to be
Mm.
fairly intentional. So
Mm.
being macro right, even though you might not be micro right on a day, really allows us to build more confidence around why that tracking is so helpful because we can be emotional, we can be volatile in the day. But if we look at that tracking over a week, it gives us a
Mm.
much clearer picture of what actually happened and how much wiggle room we still have.
Yeah, it's a whole freedom and boundaries thing, right? Yeah, when there's some boundaries there, you actually have so much more freedom to move within it. And I've oftentimes, if I've been in like a say a fat loss phase or whatever, and I am tracking very specifically, there might be something where you're eating something that's perhaps not according to plan or not as you thought you would or whatever, and you're like, oh, I don't want to track it because I don't want to know. Then you track it and you realize it's actually a whole lot less than what you thought it was, and there was never a problem in the first place. And I could have created this huge issue in my head that was never an issue at all in the grand scheme of the whole thing. And I guess there's a potential for some people that can go the other way, where you're thinking, oh, this doesn't really matter so much, and through tracking, you find out actually those Friday nights where I do this thing with my friends every week or whatever actually truly is impacting results. So it can go both ways, but it's
Yeah.
always useful.
Well, like you said, right? Numbers are numbers. We just then
Mm.
attach meaning to it. And I don't know
Yeah.
about you, I'd love to know. But for me, I jump on the scales probably 2 or 3 times a week, and I just use it
Mm.
as an assessment of like where am I at, all right? And
Yeah.
I'll fluctuate 1 to 3 kilos every week, and
Mm.
at no point do I freak out. I was like, oh, okay, that's a little bit higher. Oh, that's a little lower. Oh, that was expected. Oh, that's not expected. But an
Yeah.
awareness of I just get on, I get off, and my face expression I don't think changes because it's
Yeah.
just a data point, right? And I think being able to use that and realize that it is just a data point then
Yeah.
allows me to come back to this and use this as an assessment of is my awareness of how this week went
Mm.
actually how it went. And
Yeah.
I've had plenty of moments where I thought I was not stressed or well slept or whatever it might be, and I've noticed I put a couple kilos on. I'm like, oh, okay, that was
Mm.
out of whack. I'm going to tighten up over the next couple of days. But again, that's not a or I'm going to be more mindful of movement, or I'm just going to get to bed on time, right? It's the little
Mm.
stuff that then has a drastic impact on that fluctuation in weight. And I think being mindful of how much additional storytelling you add to numbers can
Mm.
sometimes be the big reason for the resistance or stepping away from it anyway. And I
Mm.
think, again, this is hopefully you're finding this as fascinating as we are, but being able to realize that the numbers mean one thing and then all of this behavioral stuff that we attach really makes health so much more complicated than it needs to be. And I think it's important to have a level of, I guess, being able to step back and see what that actually means as
Mm,
just data. And if you're
mm,
not, and you're causing, well, I've done this and I've stuffed up that and all that stuff, I've seen it more times than not then lead to additional days of splurging on additional foods, missing days in
yeah.
the gym, all of this sort of self-hate that comes through, right? Or
Mm.
self-critique that's not going to get you to your goal any quicker, right? And I think one of our early mindset coaches talked about this a lot is you can't hate yourself to progress, right? Like there needs to be some version of compassion. And I think
Mm.
simply numbers on a scale, either food or body weight, can be some of the best metrics for that.
I've changed my stance heaps on this over years of, I guess, practice in general and just with my own sort of thoughts on it with the scale weight. Because, there's so much emotion tied to that number on the scale, which truly has nothing to do with who you are as a human. But I think if the number scares you, we should just do it more often. Like, weigh every day at the same time, the same scales, etc., and just take the sting out of it. Because, like you say, you'll see those fluctuations that are just, oh, I had a few more carbs yesterday, or I did a bigger leg day, or I'm a little bit less slept, or whatever. And you realize that those fluctuations mean nothing to do with fat gain or fat loss, unless they're trending over time. But if you don't like what you see, just do it more often and take the emotion away from it. Just it is just a number. It means
When
everything
when
at the
you
same
jump on
time.
the scales, you're not measuring your weight, you're measuring your reaction to it. That would be
Yeah,
cool little
yeah,
focus point.
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Every
exactly.
time you jump on the scales, don't measure the weight, measure your reaction to it. I like that.
Literally
Well,
thought about that this morning because I had more carbs yesterday and I'm a
yep,
kilo up today. And I'm like,
yep,
there we go. Look at that. It works.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So we kind of touched on your fourth one there, but to be clear for your fourth one, Mandy, or our
Mm.
fourth one, your second one, what was that?
I think it's just been the emphasis on movement in general. This, obviously, as a nutritionist, movement was not my field of expertise ever, but it's really moved up its rungs in my priority list, and I would place it side by side, if not ahead of nutrition, which blows my mind now that I think about it. But just the importance of movement across the board, and I think there is a we could have a little diagram here of a triangle with the layers because we love
Yeah,
those.
nice.
But there is layers to this. Is if you don't move much, simply walk more. If you already walk, put some strength training in. If you walk and strength train, put some zone 2 in. If you walk, strength train, and do zone 2, put some HIIT in. Like, add the layers up, but
And
we
then
just
if you've got through all of those layers, get some more sleep.
exactly. Yeah, or find a really fun hobby that involves some maybe restorative movement.
Yeah.
Um, but the point is, we actually just need to move more. Like, we sort of have this all or nothing with movement. I think this ties actually into your tracking thing. Is if you put a tracker on someone, very often their steps are so much lower than what they think they are, especially if they do an office job. So at a bare minimum, just understanding your daily movement across the day. Do you just actually need to move more is super important. Where was I going with that one? I tangented and forgot.
Levels of movement.
Yeah, yeah. And just, I think just the importance of how that impacts everything else. I touched on before how it impacts energy. Like, if your energy is low, go move a bit more. But it ties into, well, fat loss, obviously, and muscle gain, which ties into longevity, but it ties into immune function, and it ties into sleep quality, and it ties into all of those things that we're all working on, and forgetting that the movement piece is a massive part of the puzzle. And it's not just movement mindless either. It's kind of intentional. Like, it's not just going and doing the HIIT class because that's what you feel like you enjoy doing, but it's what does your body need in this moment to be the best version of what it is. And it might not be HIIT, it might be actually doing some zone 2, or it might be doing some strength training or going for a walk or whatever. But yeah, just movement in general. And probably most people just need more of it, and a few people need less of it.
Yeah, yeah. And that's if you're not aware of what zone 2 is, then watch our previous podcast. But the ability to know the zone of training you're training at, zone 2 being sort of you're still able to breathe or talk at a normal level without feeling like
Mm,
you're running out of breath, as opposed to always feeling like the only time you're exercising, you have to be going out for a flat out run. And I think we see this quite a lot with our high functioning clients, where sometimes you need to tap the brake pedal, not the accelerator, because we're in a
mm,
spot where, hey, you're actually doing a ton of overall stressful activities. Your activity needs to come in a more sort of relaxing format. So
yeah.
your yogas, your walks, your general blood flow and joint moving exercises, as
Mm,
opposed to just slogging it every time you get the opportunity to exercise. And I think that's where a certain percentage of our listeners will be in a spot where they exercise really hard, yet they still have high blood pressure, they still have gut issues, whatever coming through, because everything is at such a high level. And I think that restorative piece is such a huge part of it as well. And I've even seen myself a lot more just going for a really long walk or
Mm,
really holding myself back on the bike and just chipping away, going up the hill and being very mindful of my breath, even to be able to still breathe through my nose
mm,
as a nice metric of, am I making this a restorative ride that I'm going to feel better on this afternoon, or am I just going hell for leather to the top because I always have? And I
mm,
think that in itself is, again, another level of awareness that I'm now doing this for me, not to me. And I think that in itself is, I guess, the overall concept of why we brought this up, right? Because we can do lots of
mm,
educational stuff on the difference between zone 4 and zone 2, but why are we doing that? Well, it's because you're stressing your body out, for one, but two, there's an underlying behavioral aspect here of actually nurturing and recovering and looking after your body as well.
mm. And knowing that the bigger part of our daily movement is the incidental movement anyway. It's not actually ever going to come from your exercise per se, your quote unquote exercise. It's just the movement, the general movement, walking, getting up, moving around, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and just as an awareness, if you drastically dropped your calorie target or how much you ate, your body naturally moves less, right? If you're a fidgeter, you start fidgeting less. If you are walking a bit more, you kind of find a way to take the elevator this time just by naturally eating less, because your body is in a spot where it's always trying to maintain its current state. If you try drop your intake food wise, or you drastically increase your exercise, but you don't pay attention to how much drastically your general movement in your day has decreased, then you
Mm,
might just still be at bang on, normal range or just maintenance level. So
mm,
being mindful of that overall movement through your day is really big. I remember at the peak of my deficits and calories, moving into bodybuilding shows and lots of things in a different life, I was in a spot where, I dropped a pen and I had to have a conversation with myself about picking up the pen
mm.
because it just required so much energy that I didn't have to expend, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's a drastic example, but a good example of how our body will adjust. It's just daily movement to keep and maintain where you are currently at. So it does require intention, and sometimes that intention requires some form of tracking, so you can keep yourself aware of where those levels really are. So
Mhm.
yeah, find the thing, build on that with some version of tracking. Every time someone, we do a Q&A every week now with clients. So for me, I've had to be very much on my toes with problem solving. With I talk about sleep 1 second, I'm talking about movement the next, and then nutrition. But every single time, hey, I'm having a problem with X, my follow-up question is, how are you tracking? Right? Because unless
Mhm.
I have some form of knowledge around where is that coming through, it's entirely subjective. I'm having poor sleep. How are you tracking? Well, let's track it for 2 weeks. Actually, you're getting an amazing percentage of sleep. Your deep and REM are exactly where it needs to be. So, as a percentage of total sleep, so we don't need to fix sleep. You're just not giving yourself an opportunity to have enough sleep. So,
Yeah.
go to bed on time, right?
Yeah.
So using those metrics again just gives us as practitioners much better data. But as you as the listener gives you so much more confidence in knowing, am I tracking the thing and is this really what's happening? Because
Mm.
there's nothing worse than learning the wrong lesson because you're looking at the wrong data.
Mm. And there's no judgment in any of it either. I think that's one of the reasons people get a bit afraid of tracking is they feel like it's going to show up what they've done wrong. But there's no judgment in it. It's if you stay curious about it, it's just curiosity and awareness, because you can't change something you're not aware of. So the first part is be curious, become aware, and then you can change the thing. And there's no judgment in it in the sense that it's just, well, that didn't work, so I'll try something else. You get to be your own, you get to guinea pig yourself in a way, to just test, does this work, does it not? It didn't. Okay, I'll try to do something different tomorrow or
Yeah.
today.
Hey, so one of the things I want to be mindful of time here because we will talk all day,
Mhm.
but hopefully, again, this is a fascinating space for me for many reasons. One, because you get a direct insight into what we chat about all week anyway. And my little takeaway from today that just came out of today's discussion is, don't just measure the scales, measure your response to the number. I think it's
Mhm.
just like the best takeaway from today. But I'd really love to know your thoughts on this type of style of podcast, because as Mandy said before, she comes from very much a nutritional background. I come from more of a personal training and exercise background. And we've sort of very much met in the middle, being less about all of the well, still wanting to go into all the technical stuff to really absolutely optimize every second of what you're doing, but this
Mhm.
big old behavioral piece that is just not tapped into, that we obsess about every single week in design of programs and design of language and how our coaches conduct themselves on calls, like everything in between. We have so much data to look at now that very few other people really get to see. So I want to share that with you. And we're going to see if you like this through two ways. One is obviously if you message us, I'd love to get a couple messages. Just hey, I really love this style of podcast. Keep doing it. Or two, obviously refer to other people that you know might enjoy this style of podcast as well. If we see the numbers increase in regards to our downloads, then we will absolutely do more of it. We will continue to put content out either way, but depending on what style you prefer, we will build more of that. So hope you enjoyed it. We'll wait to hear from you. And until next time, hope you have an amazing week.